After turning on Blender, make sure you press Shift S to set the cursor at the origin, then press Shift A, go to Mesh and add a new cube primitive. After adding the primitive, go to the modifiers tag and add a new multi-resolution modifier. Then add one subdivision level. Then press Shift Tab to go to Sculpt mode. After going to Sculpt mode, the x-axis is the side of this, y is the front. So what we're trying to doing it here is that we're trying to create the shape of the face. First we will start from a general shape. Right now I'm making sure the chin looks proper and making sure that the vertices also align. Make sure that when we subdivide this, it looks more equal. So go to the multi-resolution modifier and add 2 levels of subdivision. So on this different layer of subdivisions, we can add different proportion of details, and we can go back to a lower level using the modifiers tag. Add some of that minor tweaks to a low resolution model and then go back to the high resolution model, going to the upper levels using the multi-resolution modifier. And using that, we can get the high resolution details and get minor level of tweaks. Right now I'm making the nose. I have made the eye socket and the nose, and then after getting the basic proportions of the eye socket and the nose and making sure the general structure of the face looks good, erasing the nose again and remaking this. In case you put a wrong stroke, you can use the smooth brush to flatten things out and start back again on a low resolution model using the multi-resolution modifier on the beginning. The beginning base is the main thing, the main component of the model. To make sure your sculpt looks good, you need to make sure that your base looks fine. So while starting, spend enough amount of time creating a good base becomes the foundation to a good sculpt. Now making the eyes. At this point of time, it's good to save our project. Go to your specific folder. Name what you want to give. Remember the name. And now name the file you are working on. And save the blend file using Ctrl S. It's a good idea to save your model in every 1 or 2 minutes using Ctrl S button to make sure that if something crashes in the software, then you do not lose your work. While working on high resolution models, this becomes a significant thing to remember, even though Blender doesn't crash easily, but it's good to keep in check that you're always saving the file. Right now I'm making sure the eye sockets look good and the eyes are looking good. The model's eyes would be closed, that's why it's been made in this way particularly. As we go forward, we will be refining the face quite a lot and all the other individual parts. Now making the upper lips. Using the flatten brush, I'm flattening out some of the side areas on the both sides. And you'd see that the symmetry is on the x-axis. On the top bar, the x looks highlighted, and that's how you use the symmetry. You sculpt on one side and the other gets also sculpted on. For asymmetrical sculpting, you need to keep in mind to turn this option off, and for symmetrical sculpting, you need to keep it turned on. You can see that I'm adjusting the proportion of the nose and also going back in the normal details in the lower levels to adjust some of the proportions. On a high resolution model, making minor tweaks becomes really problematic over time. That's why we want to do all the minor adjustments of the basic proportions, which lays foundation of the sculpt. On the minor subdivision levels or lower subdivision levels, you want to keep that in mind. Even in the beginning, the sculpted model looks different. As we go on and refine the structures of each part, it'll start appearing more to what we're intending to make here. And it's important to keep naming your models correctly, putting in the right folder and making sure to name it ahead, and all the other individual parts the same way, to make sure when you have a lot of parts in your sculpt, you can navigate through them. So right now I'm using the crease polish brush. You want to use different types of brushes to see that which one works for you, but especially the clay sculpt, the crease polish, the crease brush, and the smooth brush, the draw brush. There's a few normal brushes work fine while working. And the move brush as well, the grab brush. The grab brush also works fine to move around the structures. Here I'm not going for a totally human look. I'm going also for a little bit of stylized look. That's why the face proportions have been made like this. You want to fine tune these nostrils. Going in a lower division level helps you to adjust it, and then when you go to a higher level, you can see that how this modifier allows you to do simple adjustments. Now we are further refining the face, the chin area. Can go back to the object mode and make a new folder as you'd like it here. And turn on the object properties. Now we have applied the modifier. What we have done is that we have kept a copy of the multi-resolution modifier model in another folder, and we have copied the head to another folder where we have added and applied the multi-resolution modifier that on which we have previously been working on till now. And this way you can go back to the multi-resolution modifier on a primitive level on the other folder that had been hidden right now, and can start working if you want to refine things on the earlier stage. Now on this destructive model, this is called a destructive model. When you apply the modifiers and you're working only with a remesher, then that is called a destructive modeling process. A non-destructive modeling process is when you're using the multi-resolution modifier only. But on the minor side of the things, especially it'd be working on the multi-resolution modifier, when your model starts taking a good shape, it goes high poly, then you might be working without the multi-resolution modifier. To different people this works differently. I've just applied the modifier because I was going for a certain type of look, and no, I don't have any reference to this. I was just making this thing completely with my mind. So it doesn't have any reference for this model. I'm just eye-visioning things while working, and making sure the general proportions look similar to a human while it carries a stylized look. But at the base of the model there had to be a simplicity. So I've just carried out the look. Now I'm using the crease brush and the draw brush as well, and remeshing the model. The draw brush is usually used to carve out things like especially bone structures. I found that the bone structures look good. Even you can make nostrils or things. It actually feels like using the draw brush, like using ZBrush's damn standard brush. And you can use the crease polish brush to add some of this creases on the face to make the structures much more visible to the eyes. And using the flatten brush to flatten out some part of the head, because usually the human skull on the side has a little bit of flattening. It's not completely flattened. And I'm going to the top view. You can use the gizmo tool, or you can press the Z to go to the top view and make the head shape overall look like a human. The top part of the head makes a lot of difference. If not tweaked well, it can't look as off. Now I'm just making the basic proportion of the lip more visible using the crease brush, making the top part of the lip more visible, and also the nose. Going to the side view, making sure that the nose looks good. Even though I know that there are some anatomical problems in the model, but for the sculpt, it is okay because this is a new experiment sculpt, so it doesn't have to be 100% accurate on this. But it's good for a learning and studying process and to teach some of that. At the end, how it looks, it matters. If it looks what you have intended for, then that is okay, that whatever the result is. Now you can see like how the shape of the face had been started to look much more natural as we keep refining the structure of the face from different angles. It starts to appear more like a human face. And as we keep refining this, it'll start to look more like a face. Adding some of this fat to the nose sides using the clay strip brush. The clay strip brush is a good brush for creating fat muscles. On creating the top part of the head or any body part, to add more fat or more skin to it, you can use this. And you can add with this some muscles, some bone structures over top of the bones. You can make some muscle structures on this, and it helps to refine the model quite a lot. And you can see that how the face is coming up. As we keep working on the shape, the general shape keeps forming. On the lower lips, you can still use the same clay strip brush to add some fat and make it look more like a lip. And use the crease polish brush to make the lips a bit more apparent on the edges, even though the lower lip is a bit more smoother than the upper lips are. So after creating the basic shape of the head, now we're creating the ears. Now drag out some of this area. You can make this ear separately and then you can join the two meshes using the Ctrl-J, keeping them into close proximity, and then you can remesh them together to do the same thing, but I'm using the existing geometry of the head and making the ears on top of it. You do it as you like, but here I'm showing that only with the sphere how you can create a head which looks more organic, but usually for new beginners it is recommended that you make all the body parts separately, basically making the bases as separate parts and then after creating the details joining them together one by one. Now here I'm dragging out some of this area, dragging them inside lightly and carving some crevices inside of it to create the ear bone structure. Now we will be refining the shape quite a lot as we go, but for now, to give the head a shape and to visualize it in a more better way, we're creating the parts, because without an ear the head area looks really off, because we usually look at a human head with the ears. Without ears things might look odd, especially to new beginners. That's why it's important that you at least keep things from the beginning. Even you do not join the ears in the beginning, you at least keep them to have a good visualization point, so your perspective remains clear. If you find that the geometry looks less dense, then you can go to the remesh panel on the top and remesh it. Use a smaller grid amount than before to ensure that it has more subdivided geometry. And drag out the bottom part of the ears. After doing the necessary adjustments, you can look from the back view and the front view that the ear looks good or not. To add in some details is to know that there is something to be done. It doesn't want to overdo things on the beginning. to keep the subtler details for the end. And now you can see the shape of the head looks more pronounced with ears. Without ears, it was looking a bit more flat. Now it appears to be more like a human head. Now, after remeshing the things, you could get a bit more higher resolution. You can see. Now we're trying to making the lips area more pronounced to the view, and it looks much more apparent from a distance. We're using the crease brush and crease polish brush to making the mouth. And also you can use the draw brush to make the bone structures of the face, because it's always that over the top of the bones the muscles are set. So in order to understand the structure of the face, you need to understand the structure of the bones. So giving it a bone structure at certain areas, like on top of the cheeks and below the eye sockets, helps it to make it much more distinguishable as an real human character, or as any biological thing that we know of. A character always carries some of the effects on the face. And now I'm using the masking tool and making this eye area to create this kind of a stylized curvature. Using the masking brush and then inverting using Control I, and then using the filter tool to push out the vertices, using the inflate option and dragging them on the side. Now you can see, using that mask, we simply like drawing. We have made this structure top of the eyelids, and that makes the eyes more apparent and more beautiful. Now, if I would have left these eyes like that, it wouldn't have looked good even from a distance view. And it's good to save your things, your project. Now we are creating the eyebrows using the existing geometry of the head. Using the mask brush, I've created this shape of the eyebrows. Now you can make the eyebrows the way you want to look. I'm going for a stylized look, but I have to keep in the mind that the face would actually look much more simple, because that's what makes Buddha much more like what he was, his simplicity. So we want to create that simplicity. We doesn't want to go too much on board with making things too stylized. keeping that simplicity to keep the model alive. So this sculpt, so going to the top panel, you can extract the mask as a geometry, and when you get the geometry out of it, and then going to the wrench icon on the modifier panel, you can use things to adjust the thickness of it. In Solidify modifier is already always top of it after extracting a geometry using a mask, and you can smooth the corners out using the smooth brush, setting it on 0.7, or maybe if you want to fine-tune it on a slow pace, then 0.5 or 0.25 brush strength. And then you can see it always comes with a Solidify modifier. What I've done is that I've added a bevel modifier along with that. It adds a bit more geometry on the corners to make it more pronounced from distance view that the eyebrows are there. And we would surely be applying these modifiers. But it's good that we have the privilege to view it before applying them, for having a non-destructive modeling process. So after creating a new primitive, subdivide it using the subdivision modifier and apply the modifier with 2 levels of subdivision. Then scale the new sphere and go to the sculpt mode. Now we'll start to shape this primitive. This is going to be the character neck portion. So first what we want to do is that we want to create the general base shape of the neck. And then you can press Ctrl and 1 in the sculpt mode to add a multi-resolution modifier. And it'll come with a single subdivision level. With this, you can visualize non-destructively the geometry with its division level of geometry. And this modifier will hold out the new strokes that you'll put onto it. Now using the paintbrush, we can start painting it. But in the multi-resolution mode, the paint tool isn't supported. You need to turn on the visibility of the multi-resolution modifier and paint it. Then when you turn it back on in the multi-resolution mode, it'll not showcase the paint. It'll only show up when you apply the multi-resolution modifier, or you disable it while working so. But later on, when we will add the multi-resolution modifier and apply it, it'll be visible. So until then, we will be drawing on the multi-resolution modifier layer, trying to creating the basic shape of the neck, which should look relevant to a human body proportion. Both from the back side of the spinal cord to the front side. Then you can increase the subdivision levels you're working on as you put levels of details one over the other. And like this, we would be creating the bone structure inside the neck area, and using different brushes and to visualize in color, you can go out from the sculpt mode to the object mode, and it will visualize in color to see that if it's fitting or not. In the multi-resolution mode, the paint tool doesn't work. Only vertex paint works. Then, after creating the neck shape, we want to create the torso. Create a new cube primitive pressing Shift A and add a subdivision modifier to it. Or maybe a multi-resolution modifier would work better in this case. So we can directly create the shape and later apply it. This is going to be the torso. So we're creating the character part by part, one after the other. So we'll be focusing only on the one part we're working on at one time. And then after having significant amount of parts, we can adjust them properly, one to the other. And trying to getting a basic shape formation in a lower subdivision level. And then using the grab brush, you can drag out some of the areas. Then you can subdivide it more to add more details top of the geometry. As it includes more subdivision, you can add more details to it. You have seen that I've already added the more subdivision levels when I've found that the basic shape now looks good, and on the higher subdivision levels and a multi-resolution modifier, I'm putting in these small details. And creating the bone structure, the top of the arms area, it is connected to the torso, and then on the chest area I'm trying to creating a definitive amount of shape to make it look much more apparent. Even though the character is going to have clothes top of it, the internal body shape structure actually gives the cloth a more general structure. This structure later on helps to identify that whether things are fitting together or not. So the internal body parts are as important as clothes are. They will decide that how the clothes will shape and bend across the model, and that will give some realism and aesthetic to it. That will make it more distinguishable as a character. Now I've added a new cube primitive using Shift A. This is going to be the belly area plus the waist area together. And just like the other one, I've pressed Ctrl+1 to add a multi-resolution modifier with one level of subdivision. On the subdivision level, I'm just trying to make the general shape of the belly. And as we go to the higher parts of the subdivision level, we'll be adding more details top of it. Right now we're just trying to getting a general shape and equally subdividing the geometry using the grab brush and pulling the geometry one by one in a subtle manner. After creating the basic torso shape, on the chest area we're fixing the proportions right here at the side of the chest area on the top. Using the grab brush, and in the going to the object mode, I'm fixing the scale because this thing needs to be adjusted as you go on, because here we're not working with a reference, and the benefit without working a reference is that you would be adjusting things quite a lot until it matches your vision in this case. So it is a good type of training also to create things using your creativity, to see that what you can do if you don't have a reference. It is generally considered that you should have a reference while working, so you exactly know what you're making, but everyone doesn't come from a background of a professional painter or something. But it is recommended that you try painting because it will help you to build things with more details, with more definitive things. But it's also important to not to be certain about the art at times, to experiment at new things, to discover new things. In order to that, experimentation comes to make something without reference, maybe even to the point of saying that to not follow a reference. Just trying to creating things from your mind and seeing that what comes out. It'll at times would feel like things are not working until you spend 2, 3, 4 hours to get something out of it. To witness that you are creating and you are a creator is to know that you need to give things time without looking at the results, that what is coming out. And you'd be surprised to see sometimes that the results would shock you. Here we're after creating the belly button, where creating the basic structures more smooth, especially on the bottom part. Using the grab brush. In this scenarios, and grab brush works really good, and you can use actually the clay strip brush and the grab brush, and be using it alternatively. And to create some bone structures or something, you would be using the draw brush, as I have mentioned before. Now it looks fine. Now you can use the paintbrush to paint on this, but you can only paint if you apply the multi-resolution modifier. But before applying the multi-resolution modifier, along with the multi-resolution modifier, we have duplicated this object and moved this to another folder that we have created on the beginning. So we want to do this to all the objects, because after going through the destructive levels, if something happens and you want to go back, there is no other way. So keeping a duplicated copy along with the multi-resolution modifier, if you're working with the modifier, is a good way. Or maybe even if you're working with a remesher, if you want to create versions of the work, like a particular type of face or particular type of difference that you have created using the sculpting, to later on think that which you want to keep, to create multiple versions of the same object, and then choosing from that as well, or to study that how you have progressed in the sculpt, to look back, or just to keep a multi-resolution modifier copy. Because currently in Blender we doesn't have the layer systems just like ZBrush have, and you cannot go back in the document the previous steps. So it's better to have a copy of the multi-resolution modifier, because you'll be using the multi-resolution modifier quite a lot. Some people don't use it, but many does. So it is better to just, along with the copy, before applying the modifier, have a separate folder which you can hide and move things before applying them. It's like it works as a backup, but it works well. Now I'm not certain about the bone structure completely, but for this stylized sculpt, I think it would look good. Why I'm creating the structure a bit more bone and more thicker on the side. Not thicker, but thinner on the sides. Because Buddha used to actually be into the jungle after leaving the kingdom. So the character has a lot to eat in the jungle, except the fruits, or maybe sometimes bread if someone gives. So according to that, he must not have a lot of muscles, or he must look simple. But he had said simplicity should look beautiful. But we doesn't want to exaggerate the look here. He was not fat, not at all. He was quite a working person, working on himself. And that's why he was meditating and helping others and using a plant-based diet. So his muscle structures should not be overly done and balanced in that way. But he had a body which he worked with. Quite a lot, and it should look like a pretty worked out person, not a fat person that we usually regard Buddha as in the statues that I've seen. So it's the completely wrong depiction of the statue. In certain stories there were indications that his body was withered and he looked weak, but he wasn't weak much. Not from the mental side, he was very strong. Now, we'll be adjusting the waist area quite a lot and the back area. Back area has the spinal cords and the muscles at the side. So we'll be creating that spinal cord look. Mostly using the grab brush. The strangest thing that I've found that we mostly use the grab brush and sometimes more than the clay strip, and we can remesh it. You'll find that the resolution you're working on sometimes needs to be higher. So as we go, and we have already have added the multi-resolution modifier and then applied it after the base levels of sculpting, and we are remeshing and using the higher levels of details right now. And I'm smoothing the geometry out using the smooth brush, and then again using the grab brush to make the waist lines clear. And it's quite magical that how this thing comes together as you go on. Now below the waistline there things do not much matter because they would be under the clothes and most of the body would be wrapped in the clothes, but it is really important that you have a really basic shape of the body and all the proportions look correct outwardly. Otherwise, when the cloth will be wrapped around the body, then the shape would not look good. Even through if the cloth looks good, from outside. It's better to be also good at inside. It's a good practice to be aware of these things. And no one becomes a great artist in a day. You still do things every day and you understand that what is working and what is not. To individual people it will be individual, but at an anatomical point it is important that things look steady. So we're going for a simple look, and this looks quite simple till this point. The appearance look appealing. That it looks simple, and to the person we're making, Gautam Buddha, it is quite significantly the same to what in the descriptions we've heard of him. That even being a king, he chose to be a person who helps to liberate others. And right now I'm making the areas more smoothed out. And if you feel the geometry is stretching too much, or there is some problem with the density, you can remesh it with a higher number. Bring that cube down using G and Z, and then add a multi-resolution modifier. And bring it down to the lower abdomen area, and this is going to be the lower portion of the body, the bottom portion, and we'll be dragging it out, making it somewhere at a square that is rounded off on the bottom and flattened out on the below, and now this area wouldn't be showed, but it is important to keep the volume right, like how to where the body starts and where finish, where the bottom line of the body is. Otherwise it would be seamed off. Even looking outwardly with clothes, the size would not fit, so it is important to make it. And spend some time. Now, one thing to do and make things more easy, that you doesn't have to create things from a sphere always. It's just for the sculpting and practicing purpose. I'm showing you that how to make everything with a sphere, but everything is not generally done with a sphere. You can just make a base model, make a cube and make it into this shape, and then you can remesh it. And then top of that you can start using the sculpting tools. And that is just fine. Many people do in that way. Also, this is only for practice purpose, because this is for beginners and they want to spend some time with how to make use of the tools. But generally the basic modeling would come really beneficial to make the base areas. Base areas are many times made from the base meshes, especially for the props, but sometimes also for this one. Now I'm still adjusting the lower abdomen portion, lower waist area, and Now it is time to add the legs. And before that, we want to make sure that this area looks fine. Because to the side of this, the legs would be joined in. And we'll go to the object mode for that and make the center. The cursor is in the center. And then press Shift A and add a new Bezier curve. And using this Bezier curve, this comes really handy in Blender that you can make legs or hands. For this kind of stylized things, it's beneficial. Maybe for some other models you want to just make it with hand or make in some other way. But for this specific character that I'm making, it works. And you then go to the curve properties panel and then you increase the depth and choose your specific size. And you can hold up these points, and using a mirror modifier you can mirror both of the legs because they look identical and has identical muscles, so it doesn't mix it. And the posture of the legs will be the same, so you can go to the side panel, the end panel, and select each point and specifies that how much depth or how much radius each point should have, each curve point should have. And that will help you to adjust the leg proportions. You want to spend some time on this, and if you have to make some adjustments on the legs, you're free to do it because it's non-destructible. It's non-destructive, and it is usually what I say that you keep a copy after making sure that your shape is done before converting the curve object to mesh in order to sculpt on it. You need to make sure that the curve object you already back up to the other folder that I've created. You want to make the same folder and back up the curve object before applying the modifier or before converting it to a mesh. And on the curve object you cannot directly assign modifiers. You need to convert it to a mesh in order to be applied. And on the both hands, we don't need the mirror modifier on the hand. And we will adjusting holding the points of the curve just as we have done with the legs. Now how I'm supposed to know that the elbows are going to go below this? So here I'm referencing some of the general body shapes using my own body, that when I sit down, that how much the elbow goes. For most of the people, the elbow will go down to that area because it's proportional to the body. So the elbow goes a little bit below the waist area, or maybe to the alignment of the waist area, that much. And both of the hands that I've created would not be same in posture, so it would be asymmetrical. And this is what I was wanting to say, that mirror modifier always doesn't work. Mirror modifier can be used to create with symmetry, but here we want to create two individual gestures of the hand. One would be resting on the lap, and other would be in a Zen posture. And that's why we want to make the other hand separated. And what you can do to adjust the shape of this hand is that you can add more points. You can tap to edit mode and then subdivide it, or you can push and try to adjust the points if you like. And if the hand shape now looks a bit more bended or a bit more pinched, then after converting it to a mesh, what you can do is that you can go to sculpt mode, remesh this, and using a sculpt brush like clay strips to add more volume to the parts of the hand that you want to use. And when you do that, the hand posture would get right. But it's usually recommended to get the shapes and the postures right if your model is in a particular gesture, sitting or standing. It's recommended that the posture looks clear and clear to your mind. And you make the postures really clear on the beforehand. After making the clothes, you cannot adjust and readjust in Blender. It would become really difficult, even if it has too many props. So make sure that your posture is the final posture and select it beforehand how it's going to look. Spend enough amount of time on this part. Now, after creating this leg and hand meshes, we're going to press Shift D and move it to a new folder, the folder that we created. And then we're going to select this and search an operator called Convert To and make it a mesh. Right now this is a curve object. In order to modify it or sculpt on it, it had to be converted first to a geometry. So once it's converted to a mesh using the operator, we now can sculpt on this. To make the base primitive geometry more aligned to what we're intending for. And then I'm creating a new folder named Hand, pressing Shift A and adding a new metaball object. This metaball object uses signed distance field. As you can see, when you Shift D and copy them and into close proximity, they join to each other. And then I'm selecting all and scaling them down. After doing that, we have a base of the hand. But now what we want to do is to create a base for the fingers. So pressing Shift A again, we're creating a new metaball object. And I'm making the resolution slightly more because it looks too small in divisions. Going to the side panel and then going to wireframe to see how the resolution looks. And after selecting all of the base hand geometry, I'm converting also them to the mesh, as metable objects are sign distance volume objects, so they need to be converted as well to geometry. Now I'm making 4 copies, 3 or 4 copies of this metaballs to create a shape of the finger, and we'll be duplicating this to 4. You need to make sure that they are not at the close proximity. What you can do is that you can convert them first and then add them side by side, and then convert them to a geometry using the convert to operator. Now I'm just positioning them correctly and copying the small finger to make the thumb. I can see that the proportion looks different. We need to scale them down. And I'm selecting the top of the thumb area and scaling it and positioning it to give it a curved look, as top of the thumb always looks a bit more curved, and thumb finger is the biggest finger of 5 in human bodies, so on hand the finger should appear a bit more bigger. And then converting all those objects into mesh and sculpting on the base of the hand and remeshing it as well to add more resolution, so we can make more definitive tweaks to the geometry. Because after making the basic shape, the geometry is too low in usual cases while using the metaballs, so you would need to remesh it once you convert it to a geometry. Here I'm just positioning the fingers correctly, so they would have a little bit of bend. They would not be completely straight, as fingers used to be not completely straight, but it did always have a little bit of bend inwardly, so that they would look much more appealing in aesthetic. Otherwise they would look a bit more stiffer and not look much more appealing to the eyes. It's important to rotate things, in this case in x-axis, pressing R, X, and positioning the base geometry. Even before sculpting at a metaball level, you need to position them correctly. And only after that, when you see that they look good, you convert them to object. Now you can make this operation, the same operations, using the geometry nodes. Now they're available, the volume object into it. And now I'm just using the clay strip brushes to make the fingers more thicken on the joining areas, as you have seen that the joining areas look too much hollow, and now they look appropriate in muscles as we keep building the top of the muscle areas on the fingers, the finger joints. And you have to do this part for the both sides. Now filling these areas to make the bone shape, because all fingers have this bone connections between the hand and the finger position, and between the conjunction point there are this bone areas that is seen, and that gives it a feel that it is the back of the hand. And because we're first creating the back of the hand, we want to make sure that the bone areas are clear. And now we're making the finger segments clear using the crease brush and adjusting the finger shape using the grab brush. As I've said, we're using the grab brush a lot. So it's identically, you can say that we'll be using like 3 to 4 brushes, mostly 2 of them, grab and clay strips. Sometimes to smoothen things out, the smooth brush, and sometimes to flatten things out, the flatten brush. So it's straightforward. You doesn't have to remember 20 different brushes for doing this work. 4 or 5 is more than what we usually require. Adding a bit more fat and flattening areas out and smoothing them as well. On the thumb, and making the joining area much more soft, using the clay strip brush, adding a bit more geometry, muscles, top of it. And building the inner hand muscles on the thumb joining area. Now, if you want, you can subdivide it quite higher later and add the small details of wrinkles and stuff. But that comes very later. Right now, we're creating the nails of the hand, and we want to remesh it further without having the enough amount of geometry. If you try to create the nails or something really specifically geometry heavy, then it would not look working. And this is where the new beginners would struggle a lot to understand that why, if you try the brushes, sometimes they do not work on the beginning, because the geometry doesn't have enough amount of resolution, enough amount of subdivisions. That's why you want to use a remesh modifier or a multi-resolution modifier. In this case, in this stage, a remesh modifier. Now I'm using the drawing tablet pen without any stabilizer on. Now you can have the stabilizer on, going to the top stroke menu and turn on the stabilizer. If you find it difficult to work on this, but I'm just showing you that yes, even without having steady hands, it could be done. You need to give it some time. There is no rush in this process. You need to make sure that you take enough time to create each proportion and make them clear, to make them look much more to the way you want them to. And that takes a bit of time and work and some patience. Doing 3D work, the best thing you'd be having is to learn patience. It's like reading books, very difficult reading books, but it is really rewarding at the end. That you know that you thought that it was not possible to read that long book, which had 700 pages on it. But you finished it, and you remembered it, and you enjoyed reading the book. 3D work is more of like that. You work on things, you learn things, you understand things, and at the end, there is some reward that yes, even that I was not ready for it, I was meant for. Because I kept the patience, and this is the way that it would taught you that patience keeps you on going. And you need to be learning that in 3D quite a lot, because this is not a single department you'd be working on. I'm just showing you how to create a base, and then with that base creating sculpting with meshes. Later on, there are more stages to this. There's not one stage work. There are multiple stages to this works. And if you're working into a limited system, the way I'm working, then it becomes quite difficult. But it teaches you that how to work within the limits. When you have a lower operating system, a system with not great specs, low hardware, then how you can manage into it. Because many people go first off the charts with high polygon ratios and good systems, and then they do not learn that how to optimize meshes and how to work within the limits. Because really fast thing could start to get out of the hand if you start putting a lot of geometry together. And then it becomes a really big problem. Now I'm using the draw brush that is actually using the ZBrush damp standard brush and it is really good at creating bones, that as I've said. Yes, you can just see that I've just made a few strokes and it looks like bones. Now these things had to be learned, and this is the takeaways from this sculpt. That how do we use which brush and in which time, in which part. And that'll give you an idea of the general things. And once you get the idea, then you doesn't have to look back to tutorials. You can be doing your own work without thinking much of the technicalities, just focusing on the work itself, enjoying them while working. And to make sure that the polygons are on the safer side while working, so first starting with a low-end hardware is a great deal, I'll say. People would say go for a higher-end hardware, but that will usually lead you to higher polygon counts. And because people have struggled with high polygon counts, they do not know how to build things within constraints, hardware constraints, because every hardware has its constraints. And when you know how to work within those constraints, then you get the idea that at any hardware, at any low-end level or any high-end level you can work. And when you can work with low-end hardwares like that, you would be able to work high-end hardwares a lot more efficiently, because you know how to optimize your models from the beginning without getting them too high poly. And that helps a lot while building large-scale models. You know how to optimize things before work, and which things might not work or which things might get difficult while creating large scale or high resolution sculpts later on. So it's a technical thing that you learn from the beginning that helps you later, and you doesn't have to struggle. So if you have a low-end hardware, because most of the beginners have a low-end hardware, everyone doesn't have an RTX card, doesn't have a 30,000 rupees GPU or a $300 CPU. So you'll be able to understand that. And how to work with this. Now, after creating the hat, go to the modifier panel and add a mirror modifier. Now, press tab in the edit mode and G and X to move them away from each other, because we would be splitting the parts. So go to tab, apply the mirror modifier, go to tab and press L on the keyboard, hovering the mouse on one of the hands to select them and then splitting them into two different objects, two different hands using one hand, because both of the hands look similar. And then placing them where they're supposed to be. So one would be the right one would be the left one. Place them using the G, Y and X keys. Rotate them equally to make them position. This is the way the character is going to sit. But without the clothes, it's not apparent that how it's going to look. But with the clothes, later on, it would be visible and understandable that how the character actually looks. But see how things came together one by one. Now, from a base sphere, we have reached most of the parts of the body, including the hands, and then we have successfully created the head, the torso, the belly and the waist area, the neck, the head. And that is the power of 3D, that you can rapidly work, and as you keep working, your speed starts to grow. And right now, I have gone into the sculpt mode, into the hands, geometry and sculpting. To make the hand and the palm joint, the arms and the palm to be joined together, and positioning them correctly so they do not look bad. Even though there's going to be clothes to fit, and most of the inner arm is not going to be present. It's good to keep it balanced. And using the draw brush, I'm making the bones of the hand. As I've said, the draw brush is a completely magical brush. It can create bone structure in seconds, and it looks fantastic. Now, if you have a good anatomical knowledge, it looks good. But because we're not going to look at the back of the hand, it is not important to be focusing on it a lot more. So what we'll be focusing on instead is the front of the hand. But to keep the things clear, I'm just making sure that all the areas look good. Even as a beginner, you want to make things good. in some bone structures more to make it much more look like the hand. And that is the refining process. You keep working on, and then you work again, and then you work again. You at least come twice or thrice to a part of the model to refine it, after creating the base mesh and putting the fundamental things on it. Until it looks suitable to your taste of your work and suits your need, and looks with the correct anatomy. Now, because this is stylized and a beginner sculpt, I'm not going too much into details of the anatomy. This is a constant learning process, and as much you keep doing it, it'll keep looking good. Maybe 2 years ago, it wasn't even this good. Even Blender's systems were not great back then with sculpting, but it was good. And now, the Blender sculpting things are really great. The only thing I would hope for that they would add a layer system. That is what lacking, but that is what ZBrush has. But that saves a lot of time. There is an add-on that can do that as well, but you have to purchase it with $20 from the market. But considering that the software is free, that you can spend $20, but it would have been great if it would have been shipped with the software, because there are performance issues with that one, but it is workable, as much as I know. So I can go back to the layers and add some details and undo them. But in this one, if you do something, you cannot undo them. So I'm making the muscles and the bone structures perfect. Now it looks more like a hand than before. So after creating the hand, you press Shift A and add a new armature, and I create a new bone for the armature. Now drag this armature down to a specific point, turn on the snapping to the volume, target the volume and make sure it is at center in the snapping settings on the top bar, and then go to the edit mode, pressing the bone and drag it out, extruding them, pressing E on the keyboard. Hold the top round shape and keep pressing E to extrude it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just try to maintaining the structure, because we're going to use these bones to actually bend the mesh and to deform it. Just the same way real human bones react with muscles. Because after creating the hand, we want to also create the pose, but using non-destructive techniques. So if you change your mind to not apply this pose, you can do so. You can change the pose and press the bone and the hand at the same time, and press Ctrl P, and then with automatic weights, it'll automatically set the weight paints with your mesh, and that will help you after going to the pose mode. You would be able to select these bones and deform this mesh like this, just the same way a real hand bends. Actually, it goes much more technical, but for the simple sculpt and the simple posture, this definitely works. You want to try to bend it in X and the Y, both axes. You need to make sure that the hand do not deform oddly and in the right way, because we didn't did the weight paint manually, so it is automatically calculating how the weight bend have been set from bone to bone. It's better to go to the animation tab and to view it from the other angles. So you can look at twice things at times, and then you can also come back to the single view. And you can rotate the thumb using the R at Z axis, and then this one at R and X axis, as well as this one, and you can see that it is giving a really nice posture to the hand. Now, if you want to do it with the other hand, you can copy this hand, or either you can create a new hand. Create a new hand pose using the other hand, using the same bone structures, making them again, and then I'm adding a mirror modifier to it. And I would be applying the mirror modifier, and rotate it at X and then Y, and then bring it down at the Z axis. And at Y axis as well, and then at Z axis. And then remesh using the remesh modifier. To add more geometry, and then try to make the hand posture as clean as possible. And also make sure that this elbow area looks good. And using the clay strip brush, add some more details to the thickness of the hand, so it doesn't look flat. Even though there is going to be clothes top of these parts, so this won't be visible, but it helps with the general idea that from where the clothes are going to be wrapped on the mesh, and gives a sense of volume to the clothes. Now this looks fine. Now after creating the hand, we're painting on the hand to make the color same, so we're going to visualize it better when it's going to be looked with the painting, with the skin color. Using the paintbrush tool in the sculpt mode. Same to the hands as well. Going down and then also on the top part of the hand. Now also add this part of the hand. Now we have successfully painted both of the hands. We want to do same for this hand as well. It doesn't take so long time, just some brush strokes or a basic color. And going to adjust using a grab brush this chest area, because we're going to refine quite a lot all the areas, because till now we have refined quite a lot, and that refinement is now showing up. Now you can see that it is appearing more like a human, but has that stylized look to it. So after creating the body, now we're painting the legs with the skin color using the paintbrush tool in the sculpt mode. And adjusting the proportion of the ears. And in this area there is a little bit of muscles would be there, using the clear strip brush and smoothing it out, and then using the crease polish brush, we're making sure that the inner structure looks clear from sides, and readjusting the shape of the ears. And then we would be pressing Shift A, we would be creating a new plane object, and pressing M on the keyboard in the edit mode, we'll be merging down all the vertices at center. And then what we'll have is just a single vertex, and we will take that to our desired place, from where we are going to start creating the base geometry of the cloth. And we would be extruding that vertex, pressing E on the keyboard. Now we want to make sure that our distance of every vertex is the same, because we want a subdivided plane, and the subdivided geometry would be used later on to sculpt. Now you can actually create this using sculpting. I'm subdividing this, shift and clicking both of the points and pressing W to subdivide to make it equally divided, because we're going to select the 4 parts of it, the 4 points of it, and selecting these 4 points, we'll be creating new faces. These points are called vertices. One point is called a vertex, and multiple of them is called vertices together. And using this, we're going to create the geometry using the general 3D modeling. and we're creating the basic shape of the cloth from one side. And adding a solidify modifier in the modifier stack helps us to see that how the geometry looks from outside, giving it a thickness. Otherwise it will be intersecting with the character geometry, and that'll not make us look into it. So in order to visualize, we're using the solidify. Sometimes you want to disable it if you want, because it's a non-destructive process, and then we apply the visibility of the solidify tool. And using a subdivision modifier after the solidify helps us to divide the geometry and to see that how the geometry is going to structure in the final output. Just like that, selecting the vertices and extruding them, and then later adding faces by filling them